Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Okay, friends, we are back in the office with Jeff Roberts, personal injury attorney down here in Calloway County. Today we're going to talk about dog bite accidents and other animal accidents that actually happen a little bit more frequently than people might imagine. Jeff, welcome back, guy.
Hi, Jim. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Doing well. This is one of those topics that people forget. Yeah, it actually falls under personal injury.
Correct.
And because it's not a car wreck, it's not something like that. It's actually an animal attack. But that falls under personal injury, and this is something that you've handled a number of over the years.
Yes, I have handled, unfortunately, several attacks by dogs on individuals. It's called significant injuries to them. And, you know, it can be those type of injuries. People really need to be careful, but even on what looks to be a minor injury, cut, scratches from an animal, you need to go get it looked at by a medical professional because it can get infected and you can have some serious injuries. Obviously, there are some attacks where the injuries are clearly you're going to the emergency room. You got to get stitches. You got to get surgery, etc. But even just minor, what would be relatively minor injuries, you need to probably have those looked at just to make sure that you take all the precautions so it doesn't get infected and develop into more than what it would have if you had gone and got treatment and maybe taken some antibiotics to keep infection from setting in.
Well, they always talk about they don't always talk about it, but I've heard stories of the amount of germs that are just present in a dog's mouth that really are dangerous for humans. And that's one of the reasons that you've got to be very, very careful when you have something that's broken the skin. You've got to get that checked out. I mean, it's not something just to put a Band-Aid on. It's not worth the risk, is I guess what you're saying. And that would also go for a scratch by a cat, right? I mean, same kind of stuff.
Certainly, it would go for a scratch by a cat as well. And I've had some friends that have had cat scratches that did get infected and have some complications from that. So that is something that you have to be careful with any type of animal. If you get injured by an animal that breaks the skin, then you need to have that checked out just to make sure you are protecting yourself from something developing down the road from that. And in regard to the dog bite situation, the dog attack situation, a lot of there are some misconceptions about what Kentucky law is about that, and I've heard people say, the dog has to have bitten somebody else before you can pursue a claim, and that's not Kentucky law. From there, Kentucky does not have a first bite rule or a one bite rule or whatever you want to call it.
Free bite rule.
Free bite rule. In Kentucky, the dog doesn't even have to have shown that it's dangerous. It doesn't have to have been aggressive toward anybody in the past. From that perspective, and the injuries don't necessarily have to be from a bite. An injury from a dog. I've represented a lady who the dog ran into her, didn't bite her at all, ran into her, knocked her down, and she broke bones in the fall from that standpoint. And so you can, if an injury is caused by someone else's animal, dog, from that perspective, then you can potentially pursue a claim, especially if you have medical bills, medical treatment. Then you shouldn't have to pay those out of your pocket. Whoever owns the dog and didn't properly restrain the dog, have it under control, allowed it to be out, then that's a situation where you can pursue a claim to get your medical bills paid. And most of the time, homeowners insurance is going to cover that situation and pay your medical bills and your pain and suffering and your other damages that you have from that bite or that injury.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the fact about people tripping over the dog or being knocked down by a dog. I've always wondered in certain situations where you see somebody out jogging or something like that, and they've got their dog running along beside them, but they don't actually have the dog on a leash, right? That the dog's just running around, and you got to think, look, if I'm not expecting that dog to be there, and I trip over it or it knocks me off my bike and causes additional injuries. I mean, again, all of that comes under this animal related claim, right?
Correct. And where you see it, that situation, or someone who is jogging on the road and the dog comes from the yard, they don't see the dog there. They may have already passed it and the dog comes running up and trips them. And you can have very significant injuries from that occurring. Or if it is the jogger's dog and, somebody else is, they're out in their front yard doing something, the dog runs over and knocks them down and can cause them to be injured. Those are the same type of situations where you can potentially recover for your medical bills and other damages that you suffered as a result of that.
Well, it's kind of funny. In previous episodes, we've talked about motorcycle accidents. I know this seems like an odd segue, but there's a reason for it. And sometimes they're just difficult to see, and that's why sometimes motorcyclists are involved in collisions because you just don't see them. When somebody's running or riding their bike, you tend to focus on that larger object, and you may not see the dog at their ankles or at their knees because you're looking at the bike or the person, and then suddenly, here's the accident. And yeah, it wasn't necessarily the bike rider's fault, but the dog caused it, so the owner is still liable.
Correct. Yeah.
And is that something called strict liability? I mean, kind of how's that kind of work? I mean,
In dog bite situations, definitely strict liability applies from that. Now,
can you explain also what that really means from a practical standpoint?
Strict liability basically means that, in layman's terms, it means if you're injured by that situation, then the owner of the dog is liable for those injuries. You don't have to prove the owner was negligent. And so strict liability, negligence doesn't have to be proved in that setting. Now, we're in West Kentucky, and if the dog is on the homeowner's property and you're there antagonizing the dog and throwing rocks at the dog and get bit by the dog, a West Kentucky juror is not going to give you anything, and frankly, they shouldn't give you anything in that setting. But if you're minding your own business, walking down the sidewalk, walking down the street, and the dog comes out and attacks you, that owner of that dog is going to be liable for that. And if there's homeowners insurance, the homeowner's insurance is going to be liable for that.
That makes a lot of sense to me then.
Yeah.
One of the things that we see here, and again, we're sticking with this animal theme, is where maybe a horse or other livestock, such as a cow or something, gets out of the corral, out of the pen, breaks through the fence, and suddenly is on the road. And that also falls under this theme of animal injuries, animal-related injuries, because now it's a personal injury claim, right?
Correct. If you have
assuming an accident occurs or damages.
Obviously, they get on the road and nothing happens, they get put back in the pen, then there's nothing to go on there. But yes, and I've represented individuals who were driving down the road and top the hill, and all of a sudden there's a cow standing in the middle of the roadway, and they can cause very, very significant injuries in that situation, and you have a claim against the owner of the livestock that's in the roadway that shouldn't be in the roadway. From that, most of the livestock owners would have a farm owner's policy, so that would cover from that situation. What you can have difficulty in those cases is establishing who owns the cow. Now, if there's only one person in that neighborhood who has cattle, fairly easy. If you've got multiple people who have cattle that right across the road from each other, two different farmers have cattle, who owns the cattle can sometimes be difficult, but it's usually you can usually establish that, and I've been able to do that frequently in the past.
Maybe there's an ear tag or something else.
Yeah, exactly. If they're tagged and so most of the time, I've had some tried to deny ownership, and we've had to establish it, but normally the farmer will, the fence has got down or somebody left the gate open, etc. And you don't really see them fight it a great deal, but occasionally you will have someone. And at least in my experience, it's been the repeat offender whose cows always get out, who try to deny that it's their cow.
Right.
From that may not always be the case, but that's where I've seen it more so than other situations from there.
But again, just like a dog bite or something like that, the cow doesn't have to show a history of having, hey, the bull got out again. I mean, it's not one of those situations. Hey, the fact is
Correct.
your cow was in the roadway.
Exactly.
Or your horse or whatever,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, and that's easier to handle. What are some precautions people ought to think about if they're, I guess, involved with a it's just a car wreck or a motorcycle wreck involving livestock like that? I know it really should be treated just like any other car wreck claim, right? I mean, they need to go ahead and take some pictures if they can. Hopefully, they're able to get up and move around if it's safe. What are some initial steps they ought to think about?
First is obviously call 911, get the police out there to the scene. If you're injured, let the officer know or the 911 dispatcher know so that they can get medical help. If you need an ambulance, have the ambulance come out to take you to the hospital. If you are able to get out, taking pictures of your vehicle in the scene, if you look and see the field right beside it and the fence is down, take some pictures of that, obviously.
Before it gets repaired magically.
Yeah, before it gets repaired, and take pictures to document that scene. Notify your insurance company because you were injured in a motor vehicle collision, even though you hit an animal. In Kentucky's no-fault law would kick in from the standpoint that the vehicle you're in at the time of the collision is responsible for the minimum of $10,000 of medical bills and/or lost wages. So if you have to go to the emergency room, that would kick in and take care of that bill.
Which is nice because again, you can get the whole reason that personal injury protection, that PIP law is there, is so that you can get some immediate medical attention. Even without having to prove that, hey, it was your fault or my fault, it doesn't matter. You're covered.
Yeah, and that's the reason it's called no fault. And the only aspect of that is that that the PIP benefits is no fault. It's called no fault benefits by a lot of folks, and that's the reason. Pain and suffering, property damage, all of that, you have to establish the other person was at fault to get those. The first 10,000 of personal injury protection benefits, fault doesn't matter. The vehicle you're in is the one that pays that, and then they get reimbursed from that fault vehicle later. That insurance company does.
And I know in previous podcast episodes we've talked about this. That yes, even though you're reporting that to your own insurance carrier, that's not going to impact your rates. In fact, Kentucky has a specific statute, I believe, that prevents that from happening. Right?
Correct. They do. So it should not affect your rates. Pursuing a no-fault, uninsured, underinsured motorist should not affect your rates whatsoever from that standpoint. And if you're getting back to what you do after it, if you're having problems, even the day after, if you don't go to the emergency room, the day of, the next day you're having issues. Right after a collision, unfortunately, I've been involved in some collisions in my lifetime. Right after a collision, your adrenaline is pumping. You may not feel all the effects of it until later that same day or the next morning, and then you wake up and you're stiff and you're hurting. Go to your family doctor and be checked out. Make sure it's nothing serious. Hopefully, it didn't. And can be treated easily. And again, your insurance will take care of it. It's not just the emergency room they will take care of. They will take care of the medical bills. And if you have to be off work, they'll take care of your lost wages. Unfortunately, that no-fault law in Kentucky came about in the late 70s. And they put it in at $10,000 for as the cap at that point in time for that. You can purchase added reparations, but $10,000 is the minimum. And they put a cap on the lost wages of $200 a week, and it's never been amended since then. So it's still $200 a week. In 78, $200 a week went a whole lot further than $200 a week goes in 2022. So
no, that makes a lot of sense. So let me circle back around and come back to the dog bites that we really kind of started the episode with. Does it matter what kind of breed I own? This was You think of the pit bull issues. You think of the German Shepherds, maybe the Dobermans and the Rottweilers as being really, really aggressive dogs. That really doesn't come into play here at all, does it? It's not the breed that matters. It's the fact that there was an actual incident that occurred.
Exactly. It does not matter the breed. Obviously, pit bull, German Shepherd, Doberman Pinscher, those type of animals are probably going to cause a much more serious injury than a Chihuahua is going to, as far as
Although not necessarily.
well, their bites are going to be a little worse than the
Yeah,
Chihuahuas now. But I mean, obviously, a Chihuahua can cause them some injuries from that. But they have much more powerful jaws. From that standpoint, but it does not matter if a dog bites you. It doesn't matter if it's a Chihuahua, Jack Russell Terrier, or a Rottweiler. The owner of that dog is the one who's going to be responsible, or should be the one under Kentucky law, is the one who's responsible for your medical bills and your damages because of that dog, the injury from that dog.
In some of the factors to these injuries that you're going to try to claim as part of this negotiation with the insurance company that may eventually lead to an actual lawsuit is the fact that, okay, I've got medical bills. I mean, that's obvious. I had to go to the ER, had to get checked out, had to have a procedure done. But there's also the issues where maybe I've got some scarring, and the extent of the scarring, and maybe even the age of the individual involved. I mean, do all of those other elements factor into kind of what you would be arguing on behalf of your client?
Yes, and scarring affects people differently.
Yeah.
As well, and where the scarring is located at. A scar on the across the abdomen of a 60-year-old man is going to be looked at differently by that 60-year-old man than it would be on a 17-year-old male or female, for that matter.
Or near the face, and somewhere like that, where it's highly visible. And
visible scarring on the face is going to affect people much different. And if the victim is a young child, there's obviously clearly psychological effects that can come into play from that. So all of the injuries, whether it's the medical bills, the stitches, etc., but also the scarring from it, the psychological effects from the injury.
PTSD can actually be argued in this type of claim, maybe?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, they can if the you see it more. Not necessarily only children can have psychological effects from these type of injuries. Anybody who is attacked by a dog can and probably does have at least some transient psychological effects from it, if not long-term psychological. But you see a child, you'll see them being fearful of dogs or all animals from that standpoint, not wanting to go to certain places anymore, and getting that treatment for that child is something that needs to occur, but that is also one of the items of damages that can come into play. But the first thing the parent needs to do is make sure they get that child to a proper mental health professional to try to deal with that, to lessen the impact from the long-term impacts from the injury.
That makes sense. And again, I do want to really, really encourage, especially if it's a parent, but also just anybody who may be listening, the risk of infection from a dog bite is serious. And Jeff, as you said, kind of in the outset, sometimes it looks like a superficial wound, but there has been a transfer. Skin was broken. And it's not something you're going to notice at first, but suddenly that can get out of control very, very quickly, and that can lead to some really catastrophic results for an individual.
There's certainly that potential there, and so getting that proper medical treatment early on is very, very important, and you need to do that. Some people don't like to go to the doctor, so they'll throw rubbing alcohol or hydrogen peroxide on it, put a Band-Aid on it, and go on. And then if you do that, you shouldn't. But if you do take that route, if you start seeing signs of infection, get into the hospital, get into the doctor immediately, because if that infection gets spreads bad enough, it can have catastrophic results.
Right. And Again, just so neither of us are physicians, we're not doctors, so
absolutely.
I don't want to get into that area. But you've got a puncture wound, so if you're just rubbing alcohol or peroxide on the surface, you may not be getting down into that tissue, down into that muscle, and again, that's where that infection is going to start. So if you're looking at the wound, and suddenly you see a lot of redness that starts to develop around that wound, it heats up, it's a little warm, things like that. Lack of motion or the ability to use that appendage, that maybe it was your hand or your arm or whatever. These are all telltale signs. You don't want to ignore that, particularly with an animal bite, a cat scratch fever. You want to watch out for that, obviously. But all of these things are things not to really mess around with. I mean, it's more serious than people think. A lot of times we laugh it off, but no, it's not time to ignore these things.
Exactly. And no, I'm not trying to give anybody medical advice whatsoever. I am not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. So you need to, and frankly, we've probably got people listening that have no idea what I'm talking about with that last comment. But yeah, what you need to do is seek medical advice, and that's what I'm strongly encouraging people to do, is to seek advice of a doctor if they have these type of injuries, to make sure that it gets properly treated and doesn't get worse than what it could get if you don't get treatment for it.
Well, and that's the thing. The longer it goes between the actual incident and when you go to see the doctor, the defense attorneys are going to maybe try to blame that problem on something else, especially if it was not a catastrophic injury. So, well, how you could have sustained that injury through some other means. So you want to make sure that you, even if it's just getting into an urgent care, maybe something like that, a small clinic, just to document in the records, hey, I was bitten by, or I was scratched by, and just kind of let that get documented. Because again, that's going to be a valuable part of, if there is a claim down the road, or if there is an individual lawsuit down the road, that's documentation that needs to be present, correct?
Correct. And what they, if you don't seek medical treatment early on, then they will claim, how do we know this is from that, or did this really occur? Usually, if somebody gets bit by an animal, it's kind of documented, at least to some extent, that did occur. But if you wait 2 weeks, how do we know something else didn't cause you to have these problems, not the dog bite? From that standpoint. And then there also, even if you can establish, yes, this is clearly from the dog bite, and an infection sets in, then their argument's going to be, you didn't mitigate your damages. You didn't lessen your damages. If you'd gone to the doctor the day of or the day after, you wouldn't have had this infection that put you in the hospital. So we shouldn't have to pay for that infection that put you in the hospital, because it's based on your negligence in not seeking medical treatment in a timely fashion. And while there's strict liability, they can still argue to some extent, if you delay and that worsens, they can at least make that argument, whether it be up ultimately to a jury if they accept that or not. So
Right. That's the unfortunate part of it. But that's that attorney's doing his or her job. You're doing your job.
correct,
And that's
absolutely.
that's kind of what it comes down
Yes.
to. I would think in an animal bite situation, animal attack situation, dog bite situation, unlike a car wreck where you may not know the other party, sometimes this is at a friend's or a family member's or a neighbor's yard where all of this occurs, and you really don't want to say, well, I don't really want to sue Uncle Joe. It's not that you're suing the individual; you're actually making a claim against the insurance policy. Correct?
Correct. The homeowner's insurance is generally what it is. Obviously, if somebody doesn't have homeowners, but vast majority of people have homeowners insurance. If you have a mortgage on your property, you're required to have homeowners insurance under that mortgage in all likelihood. Anyway, I've never seen one that didn't require it. So that's where the claim is going to be. The homeowner's insurance is going to be the one to pay those damages from that standpoint. And even if you don't pursue the claim, if it's a med pay policy where the homeowners has $5,000 of med pay, regardless if you're injured on this property, we're going to pay $5,000 medical, and you use that to pay the medical bills. The insurance company knows about the dog bite at that point in time. Any effect on the premiums is occurring because of that at that point. Pursuing the damages for pain and suffering and all probably aren't going to affect the premiums any greater than just the fact that the injury occurred in and of itself to start with.
Right. So one, be proactive with these. One, because of the risk of infection or injury, but two, because of the importance of documenting what actually happened while it's still fresh in the memory.
Correct.
And before the facts, kind of get changed.
Yes.
And as we said, where you have, for instance, livestock in a roadway, maybe the farmer got back out there and actually repaired the fence. So evidence, again, can either get altered or lost or changed in some way that makes it a little bit difficult, a little bit more difficult for you. So you, again, being proactive up front makes a lot of sense in these kind of cases, if not most of these cases.
Being proactive up front can keep you from having a lot of headaches further down the road.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Jeff, how would you like to wrap up this episode? I mean, obviously, you're here in Calloway County, but you've always had a regional practice. They don't have to live in the Western Kentucky region to handle these cases or to bring this kind of an issue to you, correct?
Correct. I handle cases all over. I have clients in Bowling Green, Louisville, currently, and so I handle cases all over. I've represented people from in Whitesville, Kentucky, and up in Covington, Kentucky. So I travel a large distance as far as representing my clients from that standpoint. So, you don't have to be in Calloway County or in far western Kentucky for me to be able to represent you in your case from that standpoint. And you can contact me. I have my local number, which is 270-753-0053. And I also have an 800 number, so if you are out of the area and you don't want to incur long-distance charges on your phone or whatever, you can call 1-800-844-5108 and reach out to me through my website as well, at Jeff@JeffRobertsLaw, or on my email, which is Jeff@JeffRobertsLaw.com.
We just try to keep it simple, make it simple.
I try to keep it simple. I try to make it as easy on people as I can.
Outstanding. Jeff, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for the input on the information here. I mean, again, summer's out, everybody's going to be out. There's going to be a lot of dogs and pets out in the area. And eventually, unfortunately, this is going to happen. And it's just having the information ahead of time so you know what to do and who to contact might make things a little bit easier for you in the long run. So, Jeff,
Yes.
thanks for helping out, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Good to see you, Jim.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit JeffRobertsLaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.